on any aspect of your concerns and to support you through the process and understanding what the process might be in raising concerns. Third thing is that any concerns that aren't resolved quite quickly through line managers are investigated. Okay. All investigations will be very much kind of evidence-based, and somebody that's independent of the area or the concerns that have been raised will look and actually investigate those concerns. And it's very much, again, looking at a kind of no-blame culture, but actually looking at, you know, what can we learn from this as an organisation and how can we prevent such things happening again or to improve the care that we deliver. Whistleblowers, so if you are protecting, we'll talk a little bit more about the protection for whistleblowers, but this should apply to anybody who's raised concerns, should be kept informed of the investigation's progress. And they're also high-level findings, so you know, that might be not a one-off incident, but where there's been widespread or ongoing concerns, say, around staffing and patient safety, that those will be flagged to the board. Okay, so what concerns can you or should you raise? I think some examples, and these are not exhaustive, are unsafe patient care. And I was kind of thinking back some examples in my own career when I was nursing, and I remember a situation. I'd moved to a different hospital, and they were still, I don't expect any of you will have seen these, but they used to use these sort of rings that were made of foam, and they were supposed to, they're like a sort of donut that people would sit on, and it was supposed to prevent pressure ulcers. And in fact, all the research that had been done showed that actually what they did was constrict the vessels to the sacrum, and if anything, they actually promoted people developing pressure ulcers, not preventing them. So I'd taken in all the research to the sister on the ward, and in those days, kind of sister's word was absolute gospel, and she wasn't having any of it. And basically, I didn't feel like I had anywhere to go. If nowadays they had a culture and a policy whereby I felt I could have taken that somewhere else, I could have actually done something about it a lot sooner. As it was, what I did was I kept putting them in the bin when nobody was looking, and then they kept going off to other wards, getting another one, and then I'd put that in the bin, and I thought, well, eventually there'll be none left in the hospital, so I'll kind of get there in my own way. Other things might be unsafe working conditions. That might be where there's poor staffing or poor skill mix, inadequate training for staff, so it might be that there's new equipment that's being introduced, but staff have not been given proper training to use that equipment, or it might be that staff are just not getting inductions, or agency staff are coming onto a ward and nobody's spending any time with them to explain how the ward works, safety things, fire, that type of thing. Lack of or poor response to a reported patient safety incident. So it might be that you might have had monitors on the ward that are not working, and it's been reported, it keeps being reported, and yet nothing gets done about it. So again, that's something that you could escalate. Suspicion of fraud. So it might be people claiming expenses or claiming overtime that they've not actually done. And lastly, but I think not least, a bullying culture. But it's very much, it's not about sort of an individual being bullied. It's about a culture whereby staff are afraid to speak up. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to move on. Okay, so what should you do? The first thing you need to do is to actually access the organisation's raising concerns or their whistleblowing policy. You should be able to locate that on the organisation's intranet site. If not, ask your mentor or somebody from Human Resources, contact the department and ask them for a copy. Or if you're in a trade union, then ask your union representative. We have in all of the the main hospitals across the southwest, we have local union representatives, so you can contact them. And I would look at both the universities and the trust policies in terms of what you need to do. Okay. The policy should outline who you need to raise a concern with, and the appropriate route for escalating it if necessary, if you feel that you're not getting anywhere with raising your concerns locally. I think knowing what the process is key to making sure that the issues that you raise are not kind of swept under the carpet, that they are listened to and that they are properly investigated. And also that, you know, your employer, once you make them aware, or say your employer, your placement, once you make them aware that there's an issue, that they have got that opportunity then to deal with it. Very often what we hear from sort of senior managers is, I didn't know that there was an issue. If I'd have known there was an issue that had been raised, I could have done something about it. Sorry, I can't move on. Right. Okay, so if you feel you're unable to raise your concerns with your mentor or with your tutor, or again, if you're in a union, contacting your union, if you feel that you're not able to do that because you don't feel that anybody's listening to you, that your concerns are not being taken seriously, there is an option to refer your concerns to what's called a prescribed body or person, and it needs to be a recognised regulatory body who can intervene if needs be. And these are set out and they are quite prescriptive, so it would be, I won't go through them all in detail, but some of the main ones are the Care Quality Commission, which are, want to know about concerns relating to the quality and safety of patient care, and I think that's quite key. Obviously, for if there's real concerns about a nurse's fitness to practice, a registered nurse's fitness to practice, then you can contact the NMC, the Nursing Midwifery Council. Okay, in terms of raising complaints anonymously, you can say that you don't want anybody to know who you are, but it may then be really difficult for the person that you tell to actually take things any further if they're not able to get all the evidence, and if they're not able then for you to be interviewed by somebody who's going to take those concerns seriously. They will try, most organisations will try as far as possible to protect your anonymity, but I said sometimes it makes it very difficult then for them to go on and actually investigate your claims. Okay, I'm just going to talk, I mean we can stop now if anybody's got any questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the legislation around whistleblowing. Sorry, we're just looking at your questions at the moment.
There's somebody's on stage.
Sorry, just bear with us a moment.
Somebody's
Right. Somebody's asked a question about how can an individual protect themselves from victimisation. We will come on to that in a moment about protection for whistleblowers. So hopefully we'll answer that a little bit later on. In terms of, and somebody else has asked, why is the emphasis only on a bullying culture, would there still not be an investigation into single instances? Yes, there would, but you would raise that under either the dignity at work or the grievance policy that the organisation has, rather than it being whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is much more about things being in the kind of public interest, so it's about things being much more widespread, about patient safety. So yes, you still can raise an issue of individual bullying, but it would be under a different policy. Okay, I think that's the questions for now. So we'll move on and just talk a little bit about the legislation around whistleblowing. Okay, so whistleblowing, basically a worker who discloses certain types of wrongdoing is said to be a whistleblower. And as I said, the kind of wrongdoing must be in the public interest. So it must mean that it affects others. So it needs to be more widespread, and it needs to be the general public. So it's not about individuals and what's happening to them. So whistleblowers are protected by law, and what the law says is that they cannot be victimised for or treated unfairly for making disclosures. So a worker is anybody who's an employee, anybody who performs services under a contract within the NHS, so that would include GPs, practice nurses, it includes trainees, so including yourselves, student nurses, and also agency workers. So any of those people can raise concerns under whistleblowing and be protected. Okay, so a protected disclosure says a disclosure of information, so it's not anecdotal gossip, kind of this is how I feel. It can't be a real generalisation. It has to be, so to be a qualifying disclosure, it's got to be one, again, that's in the public interest, and one that you have reasonable belief that a failure has occurred or is likely to occur that would affect the general public or your patients. Okay, and it needs to be made in a specific way if you are to be protected under the Act. Okay, so these are very much like the ones that I've talked to you a little bit earlier about in terms of concerns that you can raise. So it might be fraud, it might be something to do with health and safety, and that will include safe staffing, because obviously if you haven't got the right skill mix and you haven't got the right numbers of staff on duty, that is likely to affect the quality and the safety of patient care. Risk or actual damage to the environment, so again that might be about faulty equipment. Miscarriage of justice, this is because it's about all of kind of public sector. This could relate to somebody being unfairly accused and trialled where a new evidence comes to light. It's probably very unlikely to happen within the NHS. It might be that the organisation is breaking the law, so it might be that they're not storing controlled drugs correctly. And lastly, which I think is quite important as well, is that you believe somebody's covering up or kind of ignoring the wrongdoing. Okay. So, as we said, personal grievances, things like bullying and harassment, aren't covered under the whistleblowing unless you can demonstrate that in your particular case it's in the sort of wider public interest. I said there's policies within each organisation that you can use if you feel that you're being bullied or discriminated against in general. Okay. Reasonable belief, so it means that you haven't completely made it up, and that you have a reasonable belief that one of those 6 categories of failure, so the fraud or covering up or patient safety, that you believe you've got some grounds for belief that there is a failure there. It has got quite a low threshold, so you don't need to have loads of evidence there, and it's about in the reasonable belief of the worker, not the belief of a reasonable worker. And I think that's probably in the past there's sort of been said by maybe senior people looking to investigate, saying, oh no, that person's always coming out with a load of rubbish, they're always moaning about everything, just ignore that, or that doesn't wash. Okay. Right. It has to be made in good faith, and well, I say it has to be made in good faith. There used to be, before June 2013, you had to make it in good faith. So if anything was thought to be malicious, then it would be discounted. The good faith requirement has been removed, so it's no longer that you have to make it in good faith. But if you were subsequently victimised as a result of raising a concern, and it was found that you actually made it quite maliciously, then an employment tribunal has the discretion to reduce any compensation by up to 25%. So generally, in principle, although not in law, it's kind of good that you're doing it in good faith and that you're not getting any personal kind of gain from it. Okay. So methods of disclosure, so you need to disclose to the employer. Again, what I would take you back to is to look at the placement employer's policy. That will be quite detailed about how you escalate a concern. So if you feel that you're not getting anywhere with one level, it will take you up through, right up usually to the chief executive of the organisation, and then external bodies that we've talked about earlier, such as the CQC. What I would point out is that if you go, because sometimes we get members coming through and saying, right, that's it, I'm going to the media. In the majority of cases, you would lose your protected rights if you went straight to the media and you had not followed through the process. Then you wouldn't be protected under the Act. Nearly there. Okay, so what you actually disclose, obviously you need to convey the facts, that you reasonably believe that something that has happened is wrong or has affected patient safety. They can be conveyed by letter, verbal. It doesn't have to be in a specific way. The more kind of generalised you are and anecdotal, obviously the more difficult it will be to actually investigate your concerns. What we would say though is always keep documentary evidence of your disclosure, and then if it's made verbally, then to follow it up in writing to the person that you've, even if it's just an email, just to say, following our conversation on whatever date, I remain concerned about X, Y and Z, you agreed to do ABC, so that you've got that evidence that you raise things at an early stage. Okay. If you do go out to somebody other than the prescribed bodies like the CQC that we talked about, and to the employer or the placement, if you do go outside, then you have to have really good explanation why you did that. And the only real reasons will be that A, you thought that you were going to be subjected to some real detriment if you raised it internally, that you believed that evidence would be destroyed, or that there, in some circumstances in public bodies, there might not be one of those prescribed bodies like the CQC that it would be relevant for you to go to externally. But again, I would remind you that if you go to the media, it's very likely that you would not be protected. Okay, so if you do raise a concern and you feel you've then been subject to detriment on the grounds that you've made a protected disclosure, that is unlawful. All right. So basically the dismissal of any worker will be seen as automatically unfair if the principal reason for that dismissal is that you've made a protected disclosure. So for example, if you've in a nursing home, you've raised issues with the home manager, nothing's been done about it, it's poor staffing, so you go to the CQC, and then the CQC come and investigate, and the home manager then decides to dismiss you because, you know, they've now got sanctions placed on them by the CQC, and it's all your fault. Then that would be victimisation. You would have suffered detriment. And that goes on as well post-employment, that if they gave you a poor reference that was solely due to the fact that you had made a disclosure. If you do feel that you've suffered detriment, then like with most claims in employment tribunals, it has to be brought within 3 months less 1 day from the date that you were dismissed or the date that you were given a poor reference. There's no, with a lot of unfair dismissals and so on, that you have to have 2 years qualifying service. With whistleblowing, you don't. Where an employment tribunal finds that you have suffered detriment, then they can make awards, and those awards would fall into 3 bands. And as you can see, that ranges from kind of 500 up to 25,000, but 25,000 would be kind of really serious, where your whole reputation and your ability to continue to work has been, because it might have been all through the press and you'd been maligned and so on and so on. So that would have to be quite serious. So they're not, don't get too excited, they're not that usual awards of that amount. Okay, nearly there. So just key points to remember. Make sure that you've got the whistleblowing policies. If you've got any concerns, then obviously refer to those policies. I said most organisations now have appointed whistleblowing or freedom to speak guardians. Speak to them. You can speak to, if you're a member of the Royal College of Nursing, you can speak to us for advice, and we've got a lot of advice, on the website, but also you can speak to one of our advisors. You need to raise concerns as soon as possible, and I would suggest that if you're on a placement, raise them with your mentor, but also raise them with your tutor. Do raise them with your local stewards or with the RCM, because again, it's important that we know. I cover a number of hospitals in the southwest, and if I'm getting lots of concerns coming through from a number of people, it gives me then some evidence to go and speak to the nurse executives, the chief executives, the HR executive, and say, look, I think you've got an issue here, you need to do something about it. And as we said, keep evidence of the concerns. Okay, so we'll just go. Any questions before we move on to duty of candour?
There's one here.
So we've got a question, how should you approach a situation where you feel it is a patient that's treating you unfairly? Bear with me, e.g. will refuse to take medication from you or transfer for you. That wouldn't come under whistleblowing. I think you need to be obviously raising that with the ward sister, with your mentor. It might be that it's an issue with that particular patient that they then need to deal with in terms of actually having that partnership, that agreeing with them whether you can continue to give that treatment if they're not going to cooperate. Again, I think there's a number of issues. It would depend whether the person's got capacity. If they are being discriminatory against you because you're maybe from a different ethnic background, then again you need to raise that, because that needs to be taken seriously by the organisation. Again, I think where it might come under whistleblowing is if the organisation does nothing about that, and then there's a number of cases whereby patients are being able to discriminate against nursing staff from other ethnic backgrounds, and that's not addressed, then I think that does become a wider issue, and potentially that could then be raised as a whistleblowing. Okay. Any more? No.
Is anybody else?
Okay, fine. We'll move on very briefly on to duty of candour. Basically, duty of candour is about being open and honest with patients, the care that you give, those also being open and honest with those close to them when things go wrong. Oops, right. There's kind of a double whammy in that all public sector workers have a duty of candour, but also when you register as a nurse, you will also be bound by the NMC code. And the NMC code, the professional standards of practice and behaviour for nurses and midwives, there's a section on preserving safety, and in there it specifically talks about working within the limits of your competence, exercising your professional duty of candour, and raising concerns immediately whenever you come across situations that potentially could put patients or public safety at risk. So it's very specific, and if we look at section 14 of the code, it specifically says that you must be open and candid with all service users about any aspects of their care and treatment, which includes when a mistake or harm's taken place. So the first thing you obviously need to do then is to act immediately to try and put the situation right. Okay. Explain fully and promptly what's happened. I think as a student nurse, I would take advice from the registered nurse in charge and talk to them quickly, and then it might be that they talk to the patient and their family, or they go with you. I suppose I wouldn't expect you as a student nurse to go and explain what went wrong. But there is, if there's something that, I don't know, maybe you've a minor thing that's not particularly put somebody at harm, but I think it is maybe about admitting that, you know, you've not done something, you're sorry. But I said where a patient potentially or has come to harm, I would talk to the registered nurse on duty first. And also that you document the events. Okay. And there's some really good guidance on the NMC website. There's a guide that's been produced jointly by the Nursing and Midwifery Council and the General Medical Council on the professional duty of candour, and I would really advise that you go onto the NMC website and have a look at that, because it is very specific about what the NMC expect of you. Okay, that's it. Any further questions? Happy to take.
I've got one here.
Right, we've got a question here. What happens if the concern of colleagues, clinical practice, to a patient, for instance, managers favour colleagues and the manager said not to raise the concern with evidence based and discarded by organisation? I think what they're trying to say is if you raise a concern about the clinical practice of a colleague and that's dismissed by the manager because they particularly like that person or they're particularly protective of them, what happens? Again, I think you have a duty to escalate that. So if the manager, the immediate manager, is not listening and you remain you have a reasonable belief that that person's practice is not safe or not of the standard that a patient should expect, then I think you follow the policy and you escalate it. Again, I would talk to your tutor. If you're in a trade union, talk to your union, but you definitely do need to escalate that. And once you have qualified as a registered nurse, again, under your code, you have a duty to report any colleague who you believe their practice is not safe or not of the standard that it should be.
We talked earlier, Lynn talked earlier about maybe having to write statements. Just to let you know, students, that the RCN guidance for writing statements is on the POPI site for everyone. So whilst we've talked to you about seeking guidance and help in doing these things from your personal tutor, and it's important that you do so. There are some guidance there for you as well, which is quite good.
Also, I would say if you are a member of the Royal College of Nursing, we will always look over statements for you. We're always happy to do that and to provide you with any advice.
I think it's important to, as you know, there's a lot more focus now on raising concerns following Francis, as Lynn quite rightly said, but still people are still concerned about, should I raise a concern or have I got a concern to raise? Certainly as students, you're often not sure because you don't know everything, and certainly, you know, in your first year, you may have seen things that you might have thought, I don't know if that's right, if it's wrong, what's going on here, what are they doing to that patient, and you're never quite sure. And as Lynn said, you talk to your mentor. You can always talk to the RCN, and it's confidential, and even when they sort of pull it apart with you, it actually, you know, maybe you just need to have more understanding about what's going on with the patient. That's okay. It's important to ask the question rather than don't say anything. You know, and several students have raised concerns over the past few years about what they see in clinical practice, and you know, as a university, we help support that and help to facilitate concerns being raised with either the CQC or safeguarding. And so it's important to think that we're not going to dismiss or ignore you or say, oh, you know, you don't understand, you know, don't be so silly kind of thing. We don't do that. We take things very seriously and pursue things to a conclusion. What we don't want you to do is to be in a placement area where you feel patient care isn't as it should be. We want to ensure that if you raise concerns, that we will find an alternative placement for you to enable an investigation to take place, and don't feel that you've got to go in thinking that everybody's, you know, thinking I shouldn't have done it or whatever, or give you those kind of feelings that would make things difficult for you to go into your placement. There are always ways around a problem or an issue for us to help students with, whatever they are, and certainly raising concerns and ensuring that you're protected from any fallout, or is a paramount for us as well, because we can't expect you to continue to go in somewhere where you've raised a concern, but we also ensure that if we act on your behalf, that we close that loop for you and let you know of outcomes and what's happened in light of. And I've just been doing that with a couple of student groups, been feeding back to them recently about what's happened since they raised concerns in the placement area. It's very important, and it's sometimes it's an uncertainty, you're not sure what's going on, and you talk to your mentor, and if you still think that's not right, then, you know, as Lynn's quite rightly said, there are lots of avenues you can pursue to raise a concern.
I think more organisations are, I know sort of the latter part of the presentation was talking about the legislation around protecting whistleblowers, but I think most organisations don't want you to get to that point. Actually, what they want you to be able to do is to raise any concerns that can be dealt with then sort of promptly, and that's what they want. And I know Somerset Partnership have actually got a whole programme where they're putting staff through training about how do you kind of say something if you see that something's not right, and about giving them the skills to speak up at that really early stage, because what they don't want is to get to a point where there's really unsafe practice and people feel that they need that protection to be able to raise the concerns. So I think it is about picking small things up as early as possible, and then hopefully, you know, if everybody's doing that, we don't get to some of the, you know, we don't get to a mid-staffs. So.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let me just turn the webcam on so you wave goodbye to it. Right. Sorry about some of the technical difficulties, but we got there in the end. Thank you for those of you who posed questions. I have been recording this, so it will be put up onto your Moodle site. We'll get Andy to do that, and we we'll move on. So you've got a bit of breathing space now before your next next lecture, and all the best. Oh, hang on, Lynn's got
Just going to
something
say, any of you that are not members, we have got freshers coming up, and basically if you turn up, it'll be on the next Monday on the 19th between 2 and 3 in the Sherwell Centre, or on the 21st between 1 and 4 in the Sherwell Centre. And if you turn up and you're not a member, it's £10 a year, and you will get a tote bag and some goodies, including a fob watch and the very popular sort of nursing essential guides. So hopefully I might see you, some of you there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn. Hopefully the guys in Cornwall, you managed to join us as well. I haven't heard anything say that you didn't, and we'll say cheerio for now. Thanks very much.
Right, I'll snap my take away.
I haven't turned it off yet. Still haven't turned it off.